643 likes. That is how many people saw the photo and felt something warm in their chest. A man and a woman, dressed like a magazine, his hand on her waist, her smile so wide, so genuine, so full of light that a woman in the comments typed, "This is what I ask God for every single night." Another woman wrote, "Black love is so beautiful." A teenager wrote, "Goals." Nobody saw the bruise. Nobody saw the way she had stood in the bathroom that morning for 22 minutes choosing between 2 shades of concealer. Not because she wanted to look beautiful, because she needed to look unmarked. Nobody saw the way she flinched slightly when he reached for her waist for the photo. The way her body had learned, without her permission, to brace itself whenever his hands moved toward her. Nobody saw any of that. They only saw the smile. And that smile was the most painful thing about all of it. Because part of it was real. Part of her still loved him. Part of her was still standing in that church fundraiser in Atlanta 3 years earlier, watching a man in a gray blazer laugh across the room, feeling something stir in her chest that she had not felt in a very long time. That is the part nobody tells you about this kind of story. The beginning was genuinely beautiful. That is what made it so devastating. Her name was Carolyn Merritt. She was 41 years old. She was a mother and a daughter and a woman of faith and a woman who laughed too loudly at dinner tables and cried at commercials and made the best sweet potato pie in her family and had survived her first marriage ending and had rebuilt herself from the ground up into something she was proud of. And then she met Douglas Hale. And everything she had built began, piece by piece, so slowly she barely noticed, to come apart. This is her story. The full story. The one she was never supposed to tell. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. You have to understand who Carolyn was before Douglas. Because that is the part people skip. They jump straight to the darkness. But the darkness only makes sense when you understand the light that came before it and the particular hunger a woman carries when she has been lonely for a long time. Carolyn had been raising her daughter Brianna alone since Brianna was 9 years old. Her first marriage, to a quiet man named Gerald, had not ended in drama or betrayal. It had simply ended. 2 people who had grown into entirely different directions and finally had the honesty to admit it. They co-parented well. They were civil. Brianna spent weekends with her father and holidays were divided peacefully, and from the outside it looked like a success story. But Carolyn was alone. Not lonely in a desperate way. Not the kind of lonely that makes a woman make bad decisions just to feel a pulse beside her at night. She had made peace with her life. She had her daughter. She had her mother and her sister Denise and her best friend Renee, who had been her roommate in college and who called every Sunday morning without fail. She had her job as an office manager at a physical therapy practice in Decatur, a job she was good at and that gave her purpose and kept her busy and paid the bills. She had a full life. But she went to bed alone every night. And some nights that was fine and some nights it sat on her chest like something heavy and she would lie there in the quiet of her house listening to Brianna breathing down the hall and she would think, "Is this it? Is this the shape of the rest of my life?" She was not bitter about it. She was just honest. So when her friend from church, Sandra, invited her to the annual fundraiser dinner at Cornerstone Baptist in October, Carolyn almost said no. She was tired. She had worked a long week. She had been planning to spend the evening on her couch with a cup of tea and a book she had been trying to finish for 3 months. Sandra said, "Carolyn, put on a dress. Come out of that house." She put on a dress. She walked into that church fellowship hall at 7:15 on a Friday evening and the room smelled like good food and there was gospel music playing softly from somewhere and she saw people she knew and people she did not know and she got herself a plate of macaroni and cheese and started making her rounds. And then she heard the laugh. Came from across the room. Full and unrestrained, the kind of laugh that does not perform itself for anyone. The kind that happens because something is genuinely funny. She looked toward the sound. A man. Tall. Dark suit, gray blazer. He was talking to 2 other men and he was laughing at something one of them had said and he was completely at ease in his own skin in a way Carolyn noticed before she noticed his face. She noticed his face a few seconds later. He was handsome, not in a flashy way, in a settled way. A man who had grown into himself. She looked away. 40 minutes later, he was standing beside her at the dessert table. His name was Douglas. Douglas Hale. He worked in commercial real estate. He had grown up in Macon, Georgia, and had been attending Cornerstone Baptist for about a year. He had never been married. No children. He asked about her before he talked about himself, and when she mentioned her daughter Brianna, he did not do what some men did not let a flicker of hesitation cross his face. He said, "How old is she? What is she into?" Carolyn told him about Brianna's soccer obsession. He said his younger sister had played soccer all through high school. He said it was the best sport to watch live. He asked if Carolyn went to Brianna's games. She said she never missed one. He smiled. He said, "That is the kind of mother I would want for my children someday." Carolyn laughed. She told him that was a very forward thing to say to a woman you just met. He said, "I believe in being honest about what I am looking for." She drove home that night with her hands on the wheel and a feeling in her chest she did not immediately know what to do with. She told herself not to make anything of it. Men said charming things at church events. She was a grown woman. She was not going to be swept away by a nice jawline and a good laugh. He texted at 10:47 that night, "Just making sure you got home safely. It was good meeting you, Carolyn." She stared at that text for longer than she would ever admit to anyone. She texted back, "Made it home fine. It was good to meet you too." She set her phone down. She picked it up again. She put it face down on the nightstand and turned off the light. She was smiling in the dark. The courtship was 9 months long, and it was, by every visible and invisible measure, extraordinary. Douglas called every day. Not texted. Called. He had a deep, unhurried voice, and he asked about her day and actually listened and remembered things she had mentioned in passing. 3 weeks after they met, she told him offhandedly that she had been craving the jerk chicken from a Jamaican spot in Decatur that she used to go to in her 20s but had not been back to in years. The following Saturday, he showed up at her door with 2 takeout containers from that exact restaurant. She had not told him the name. He had asked Sandra. She stood in her doorway holding that takeout container, and she thought, "Who does this? Who pays this kind of attention?" He came to Brianna's soccer game in November. He sat in the cold on those metal bleachers in a heavy coat with a cup of bad coffee and cheered for a girl he barely knew, and at halftime Brianna jogged over and Douglas stood and said, "You are fast out there," and Brianna, who was deeply suspicious of every man her mother had ever so much as mentioned, looked at him for a moment and then said, "Thank you," and jogged back, and later in the car she said to her mother, "He actually watched the game, Mama. Most men just sit there on their phone." He met Carolyn's mother, Miss Gloria, in December. He brought a sweet potato pie he had made himself. He sat at Miss Gloria's kitchen table for 3 hours and talked about his faith and his family and his plans, and he helped clear the dishes without being asked. Miss Gloria walked Carolyn to the front door when she was leaving and said quietly, "That is a man with substance. Do not let fear make you slow." Her friend Renee met him in January. Renee, who had strong opinions about every man Carolyn had ever dated and who had never once fully approved of any of them, called the next morning and said, "Carolyn, I like him. I actually genuinely like him." Even Carolyn's daughter, cautious and watchful Brianna, had begun to warm. And Carolyn herself. Carolyn was falling. She tried to be measured about it. She tried to fall slowly and with her eyes open. But Douglas made it difficult to be measured. He was so present, so consistent, so deliberate in the way he showed her that she mattered. Every conversation felt like he was choosing her, consciously, actively, on purpose. There were small things she noticed and folded away. Once, early on, they were driving and a song came on the radio, an old Earth, Wind and Fire song, and Carolyn turned it up and started singing along, and Douglas reached over and turned it back down without a word. She had stopped singing. She thought maybe he did not like the song. Once, at a restaurant with another couple, she had disagreed with something Douglas said about a movie they had both seen. A small, playful disagreement, the kind couples have. And Douglas had smiled and said, "Well, that is one way to look at it," and moved on. But in the car afterward he had said, "You contradicted me in front of people." She had apologized. She was not sure why she had apologized, but she had. Once, he had said, "You know you are beautiful, but you would be even more beautiful if you wore your hair differently." She had changed her hair. Each thing felt small. Each thing felt like an adjustment. Each thing felt like the natural friction of two people learning how to fit together. She folded them away and focused on the larger picture. The man who called every day. The man who showed up to soccer games in the cold. The man who baked sweet potato pie and talked to her mother for 3 hours. He proposed on a Sunday evening in April on the back porch of her house. He had no photographer, no choreography, no audience. Just him on one knee with her grandmother's ring that he had quietly asked her sister Denise to help him retrieve, and the sound of spring insects starting up, and the last light of the day coming through the trees. He said, "I have been looking for you my whole life, and I did not know that until I found you. I want to spend the rest of mine making sure you know every single day how much you are worth." She said yes before she realized she was speaking. Their wedding was a Saturday afternoon in June. Cornerstone Baptist filled with ivory roses. Brianna, 16 years old, walked her mother down the aisle in a pale gold dress, and Carolyn could feel people crying before she even reached the altar. Douglas stood at that altar, and when he saw her, he pressed his hand flat against his chest like he was steadying something inside himself. Pastor Emmanuel said he had performed many ceremonies in his years of ministry, but that there was something in this room today that was different. Something holy. 120 people stood and applauded when they were pronounced husband and wife. It was the most beautiful day of Carolyn's life. She would spend the next 5 years trying to hold on to the memory of it, turning it over and over in her mind like a stone that had lost its warmth, trying to understand how the man at that altar and the man she eventually came to know could possibly be the same person. It started with her laugh. 3 weeks after the wedding, they attended a cookout at Douglas's colleague Marcus's home in Stone Mountain. It was a warm evening. There were children running through sprinklers. Someone was grilling. The air smelled like charcoal and cut grass, and Carolyn felt relaxed in a way she had not in weeks. She fell into conversation with a group of women she had just met. They were funny, the kind of women who finish each other's sentences and make you feel like you have known them forever. Carolyn was laughing, properly laughing, the full-body kind, the kind that made her press her hand to her chest. When they got to the car, Douglas was quiet. She asked what was wrong. He said, "You were very loud tonight." She waited for him to continue. He said, "I could hear you from across the yard, Carolyn. Every time I looked up you were performing for those women." Performing. She said she was just having a good time. He said, "There is a version of having a good time that is appropriate, and there is a version that is embarrassing to your husband. You need to understand the difference." He said it without raising his voice. He said it the way you explain something obvious to someone who should already know better. She sat in the car and felt something in her chest that she could not name. A small collapsing. She told herself it was a reasonable thing for a husband to say. She told herself she could be more mindful. She told herself this was just the beginning of marriage, the two of them figuring out how to be a unit. She became more mindful of her laugh. Within 6 months, the laugh was nearly gone. She still smiled. She still made the appropriate sounds at the right moments. But that full body, hand on chest, head thrown back laugh that had been hers since she was a girl, that one she had learned to put away. She did not notice it happening. That was the nature of all of it. You do not notice the things that disappear slowly. Next was Renee. Douglas began to express concern about Renee's influence. Renee was single, he said. Renee had never been married and had very specific ideas about independence and what a woman should expect from a man, and those ideas were fine for Renee's life, but they did not belong in a marriage. He said this calmly, over dinner, as if he were simply sharing a considered opinion. Carolyn defended Renee. She said Renee was her closest friend. She said Renee had nothing but support for their marriage. Douglas said, "I am not telling you what to do. I am just sharing what I observe. You always seem agitated after you talk to her." She had not noticed that. She began to wonder if it was true. She began to get off the phone with Renee a little earlier. Then a little earlier still. The Sunday morning calls became every other week, then monthly, then occasional. Renee, for her part, kept calling. Carolyn kept making excuses. Too busy. Tired. Things are hectic right now. Renee would say, "I feel like I am losing you." Carolyn would say, "Nothing is wrong." Everything is fine. Everything was not fine. But she did not know that yet. Or she was not ready to know it. There is a difference, and she lived in that difference for a long time. Next came the job. She had been office manager at the physical therapy practice for 6 years. She was good at it. Her colleagues liked her. The work gave her structure and purpose and a paycheck that was entirely her own. Douglas suggested she leave. He framed it as care. He said she did not need to exhaust herself. He said he earned more than enough for them both. He said a wife's first job was her home, and he was not saying that to control her. He was saying it because he wanted her to be able to rest. He said it would give her more time for them. She fought it longer than she fought most things. She said she was not ready. She said her job mattered to her. He did not argue back. He simply became quieter, cooler, more distant. He stopped reaching for her hand. He stopped asking about her day. The warmth, that specific warmth that she had come to need the way you need light in a room, switched off. She lasted 3 more months before she resigned. The day she handed in her notice, she sat in her car in the parking lot of the practice for a long time. She told herself it was the right thing, that she was prioritizing her marriage, that this was what partnership looked like, sacrifice and compromise. She was 30 minutes late getting home because she sat there so long. Douglas did not say anything about the timing, but she saw him check his watch when she came through the door, and something in her stomach tightened. She was not supposed to be late. She was beginning to understand, though she could not yet say it plainly, that there were rules. Many rules. And they were not posted anywhere. They were not discussed. They shifted. But she was expected to know them and follow them without being told, and the consequences of breaking them, while never directly stated, were always present and always felt. She was always waiting for the consequences. People imagine abuse a certain way. They imagine a man who is loud and obvious. A man you can see coming. A man whose danger announces itself. Douglas Hale was nothing like that. Douglas Hale was the man who held doors and remembered anniversaries and spoke beautifully in church, and was, to every person outside their home, a model of what a husband should be. He was admired. He was respected. He was the kind of man other men wanted to be friends with, and other women secretly envied Carolyn for having. Inside the house, he was a different architecture entirely. His cruelty was quiet, controlled, precise. He had a gift for finding exactly where a person was most tender and pressing there. Not every day, not even every week, but often enough that Carolyn lived in a permanent state of low-level dread. The way you live during a season of bad weather, never fully relaxed, always aware that the sky could shift. Monday mornings he went through her phone before work. He did this openly, casually, the way you check the weather. He would scroll through her messages, her call log, her photos. He never asked permission. He never explained himself. He would hand the phone back and leave without a word, and she would stand there in the kitchen and wait for the fallout that may or may not come. Sometimes there was no fallout. Sometimes he came home that evening and was entirely normal, and she would exhale and think, okay, we are fine. Sometimes he came home and the jaw was set and the eyes were flat, and she would spend the entire evening in a heightened state of alertness, cataloging everything she had said and done that day, trying to find the thing she had gotten wrong. He called her stupid for the first time 13 months into the marriage. She had misplaced a document he needed. She had looked everywhere. She had apologized. He stood in the doorway of the home office and looked at her for a long moment and then said, "You are unbelievably stupid. Do you know that? How does a grown woman not know where she has put something?" The words landed like something physical. She stood there and did not speak. He found the document himself. He walked past her without acknowledging her. That evening he brought her flowers and said he had been under enormous stress with a deal that was falling apart, and that she knew he did not mean the things he said when he was stressed. He asked if she forgave him. She said yes. She meant it, or she wanted to mean it. She was not sure there was a difference anymore. He called her stupid 11 more times in the following year. He called her useless. He called her ungrateful. He told her she had no substance, that she was a surface woman, that he had expected more from her. He told her she was lucky he had married her because no one with any real standards would have. He said these things in the same quiet, controlled tone he used for everything. Never screaming. The calmness of it was somehow worse than screaming would have been. Screaming would have been easier to point to, easier to call what it was. This was delivered like assessment, like fact. And over time, no matter how much she resisted it, some part of her began to absorb it. She began to believe she was careless, that she was difficult, that she provoked things, that if she were just a little more careful, a little more attentive, a little better at anticipating his needs, things would be different. She ran the calculations constantly. She rebuilt her behavior around preventing his moods. She became an expert in him in the way that prisoners become experts in their guards. She knew the weight of his footsteps. Heavy footsteps from the garage meant he had had a difficult day and she needed to become invisible. Light footsteps meant the good version of him was home and she could breathe. She knew the particular silence that meant he was building toward something. She knew the micro-expression on his face, the slight stillness around his eyes, that meant she had 30 seconds to correct whatever she had done before it became something else. She knew these things the way she used to know song lyrics automatically without trying. Her daughter Brianna, home for spring break in the second year, watched her mother move through the kitchen one evening, watched her check the clock, watched her adjust the temperature on the stove, watched her go still when they heard Douglas's car in the driveway. "Mama," Brianna said softly, "you look scared." Carolyn said, "I am just focused on dinner, baby." She was not just focused on dinner. She had lost 14 pounds in 18 months. Her colleagues from the job she no longer had would not have recognized her. Her mother mentioned her weight at Easter and Carolyn said she had been watching what she ate. Her mother looked at her for a moment longer than necessary and then said in a way that meant she did not fully believe it. Carolyn slept badly. She had started clenching her jaw at night and her dentist had asked about stress. She said work. She had not worked in over a year. She was disappearing. Slowly, methodically, piece by piece. And the terrifying thing was that from the outside, nobody could see it. Because Douglas was magnificent on the outside. And she, through years of practice, had become an exceptional performer. Their Instagram said couple goals. Their Sunday pew said blessed. Their friends said, "You two make marriage look easy." And Carolyn smiled and said, "We are just very intentional." And she went home and read the driveway and adjusted herself to whatever weather was waiting inside. The morning she took the pregnancy test, she was alone in the house. Douglas had an early meeting. She stood in the bathroom in the gray winter light and waited for the result, and when the 2 lines appeared, she pressed both hands flat against the edge of the sink and steadied herself. A baby. She was 8 weeks along, the doctor would later tell her. She sat in the bathroom for a long time before she moved. She thought about the nursery. She thought about her mother's face when she found out. She thought about Brianna, who would be a big sister at 19, and how that conversation would go. She thought about the smell of a newborn's head. She felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Joy. Pure and uncomplicated. Rising up through all the exhaustion and fear and careful performance of her daily life. Just pure joy. She called her sister Denise before she even called her mother. Denise screamed. Actually screamed into the phone and then immediately apologized for screaming and then screamed again. Carolyn laughed. The real laugh. The one she had been hiding for 2 years. She told Douglas that evening over dinner. She had made his favorite meal. She had set the table with candles. She had planned it. He looked up from his plate. He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "Was this planned?" She said they had discussed it. She reminded him of a conversation from 6 months earlier where he had said he was open to having a child with her. He was quiet. He said he would need some time to think about this. He got up from the table, left his food, went to his study. The door closed. Carolyn sat at the table with the candles burning and her hands in her lap and breathed through the familiar tightening in her chest. She told herself he would adjust. It was a surprise. Men needed time to process surprise. He would come around. He did come around. Over the following weeks, he began to soften. He touched her stomach sometimes in the morning before he got up. He went with her to the first appointment at 8 weeks and stood beside the table and watched the screen and said nothing, but she saw something move across his face, something that looked, briefly, like wonder. He held her hand in the car on the way home. She let herself hope. By 5 months in, she was rounder and slower and glowing in the way that people kept telling her she was glowing, and for once she believed them because she felt it from the inside. Her mother came to stay for a week and cooked every day and fussed over her, and the energy in the house during that week was lighter than it had been in years. Even Douglas was pleasant. He sat at the table with Miss Gloria and talked and laughed, and Carolyn watched them from across the room and thought, "This is what I wanted. This is the life I thought I was marrying into." Her mother left on a Sunday afternoon. By Sunday evening the house had changed again. She felt it the moment the car disappeared from the driveway. The subtle shift in atmospheric pressure. The specific quality of Douglas's silence. She made dinner. She was careful. She was always careful, but she was especially careful now because she was 5 months pregnant and her body moved differently and she was more tired and she could not afford to miscalculate. She was washing the dishes after dinner. The kitchen was quiet. She reached for a glass on the high shelf and it slipped. It fell to the tile floor and shattered into 4 large pieces and a spray of smaller ones. She heard the scrape of his chair in the next room. She was already moving to clean it up. Already saying, "It is okay, I have it, it just slipped." Her voice was too bright, too fast, compensating the way she had learned to compensate. She heard his footsteps. She heard the particular weight of them and her whole body went cold. She turned toward him with her hands already raised slightly, open. A gesture that meant nothing is wrong. It was an accident. Please. He looked at the broken glass on the floor. He looked at her. His face was terrifyingly still. She said his name. He moved. It was not a slap this time. He grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her so hard her teeth clacked together, and then he shoved her backward and she could not catch herself. She was 5 months pregnant and her balance was different and she could not catch herself, and she went into the counter, her lower back, and then she went down to the floor. She lay on the cold tile with her hands over her stomach and she felt the impact echoing through her body, and she said, "The baby. Douglas. The baby." He stood over her for a moment. Then he stepped around her and left the kitchen. She heard him go upstairs. She heard his study door close. She lay there. She did not cry out. She did not call for help. She lay there for a long time with her hands pressed flat over the curve of her stomach, feeling for movement, speaking silently, talking to her baby in the private language of a mother, saying, "It is okay. I have you, you are okay." She told herself she had not been hurt badly enough to need a hospital. She told herself she would feel the baby move soon and everything would be fine. She told herself this for 40 minutes while she lay on that floor. Then she felt something she did not expect to feel. She drove herself to Piedmont Hospital. She parked the car and sat for 3 minutes before she went inside. The waiting room was bright and ordinary. People with ordinary problems. A man with a wrapped hand. A woman with a coughing child. The television in the corner playing a cooking show. Carolyn walked to the desk and said, "I am 22 weeks pregnant and I fell and I am concerned." She used the word fell. The nurse took her back immediately. The doctor was a woman, older, with a calm face and gentle hands. She did the ultrasound herself. She moved the wand slowly. Her face did not change, and that was when Carolyn knew, because a face that does not change when it should change is a face that is preparing you. The doctor set the wand down. She said, "Carolyn, I am so sorry." She lost her son that night. A boy. She had not known she was having a boy until that moment. 22 weeks. His heartbeat had been strong at the last appointment. She had a photograph of his profile from that ultrasound, that tiny perfect profile, the curve of a nose, the suggestion of a chin. She had it in her wallet. They gave her a card when she left. A small white card with a tiny footprint on it in ink. Her son's foot. The only mark he ever left on the world. She held that card in both hands in the hospital room while Douglas sat in the chair beside the bed with his face appropriately composed. The grieving father, and a nurse squeezed her arm and said she was deeply sorry and asked if there was anything she needed. Carolyn looked at the ceiling. She thought about the kitchen floor, the cold tile, the sound of his study door closing. She said, "I just need to rest." Douglas drove them home. He held her arm, helping her to the car. He was tender in the parking lot, the kind of tender that looked like love from the outside. She let him hold her arm. She needed the help walking. She went directly to the bedroom. She lay down in her clothes. She stared at the ceiling. He appeared in the doorway and said, "Do you need anything?" She said no. He said, "We will get through this. We will try again when you are ready." She said nothing. He went to his study. She lay there in the dark with the footprint card pressed between her palms, and she felt something moving through her, slow and tectonic, shifting everything it touched. Not grief. She would get to grief. This was something beneath grief. Something older and colder and harder. It was clarity. For the first time since this had all begun, she was not confused. She was not explaining it away or folding it into the context of his stress or his difficult upbringing or the pressures of his work. She was not softening anything or finding the charitable interpretation. Her son was gone, and she knew why. She knew exactly why. And she lay in the dark and she made a decision so quietly that there was no drama to it, no lightning bolt or revelation. Just a woman in the dark arriving at the simple, irreversible truth that she was done. Done performing. Done shrinking. Done waking up every morning and reading the weather of a man who had taken everything from her and then taken her child. Done. She did not move for a long time. She just lay there with the card in her hands and let the decision settle into her bones. She was going to leave Douglas Hale. And she was going to do it right. The first thing she did was sit on the bathroom floor. Not the kitchen floor. She was never going back to the kitchen floor. She had made that decision while she was still lying on it. She went to the bathroom, the room where she had cried 100 times in 5 years, the room where she had pressed cold cloths to bruises and rehearsed apologies she should never have had to give, and she sat down against the tub and she stayed there for a long time in the quiet. She was not crying. She had passed through crying somewhere back down the road. What she felt now was something harder than tears. Something with edges to it. Something that had been building for 5 years under all the fear and confusion and desperate hope and careful performance. And it had finally arrived, and its name was enough. She had had enough. She thought about her son. The boy she would never hold. The footprint on the white card. She thought about the first time Douglas had called her stupid, the way the word landed like something physical, and how she had apologized to him afterward. She had apologized to the man who had just called her stupid. She had stood there and said she was sorry for upsetting him. She would not apologize again. Not once more. Not ever. She reached for her phone. She had photographed a number 6 months earlier on the bulletin board at her OB's office. The National Domestic Violence Hotline. She had looked away from it every single visit before that. Too close. Too real. Too much of an admission of what her life had become. She found the photograph. She stared at the number. She dialed. A woman named Patricia answered on the second ring. Patricia's voice was the steadiest voice Carolyn had ever heard. She did not gasp at what Carolyn told her. She did not say, "Are you sure?" or "Have you tried counseling?" or "Maybe he is just going through something." She listened. Every word. All the way to the end. And when Carolyn finished, Patricia said, "What you have described is abuse. It has a name. You are not imagining it. You are not to blame for any part of it." Carolyn sat on the bathroom floor and pressed her free hand flat against the tile and breathed. Those words. She had not known how much of her had been waiting for someone to say those exact words. How much of her had been slowly drowning in the possibility that she was the problem, that she was too sensitive, that she provoked things, that a different version of herself would have a different life. Patricia's words cut through all of that like light through a window that has been covered for too long. You are not to blame. She was not to blame. Patricia told her about Safe Harbor, Atlanta. She gave her a name, a woman named Gloria, an advocate who had walked many women through exactly this, who would help her build a plan. Patricia told her what to do in the meantime. Document everything. Dates and times and words used and things broken. Save copies of important documents. Open a bank account he does not know about. Tell one trusted person. One person who can hold things for you. Carolyn thanked her. She sat on the bathroom floor after she hung up and let the steadiness of Patricia's voice settle into her. Then she stood up. She washed her face. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. The woman looking back at her was thin and tired and carrying 5 years of careful survival in the lines around her eyes. She said to that woman, "We are getting out of here. I promise you, we are getting out." That night, while Douglas slept, she opened her phone and created a new email account. Letters and numbers that meant nothing to anyone but her. She opened a draft she would never send and she began to write. She wrote the date. She wrote what had happened in the kitchen. She wrote it plainly, without softening a single word, without finding the charitable interpretation, without leaving space for his excuses. She wrote, "He shoved me into the counter while I was 5 months pregnant and I fell and I drove myself to the hospital and I lost our son and he went to his study." She wrote it and she saved it. Then she kept going, backward through 5 years. Every incident she could name and date. Every word he had used. Every friend removed. Every job resigned. Every purchase questioned. Every morning she handed over her phone and stood in the kitchen and waited. For pages. Single-spaced. 5 years of her life. She read it back and she did not recognize herself in it, the woman it described, the woman who had made herself that small, and then she did recognize herself, and both of those things were true at the same time and both of them broke her heart in different ways. She connected with Gloria at Safe Harbor on a Thursday morning. They spoke in careful, quiet calls during Douglas's gym sessions, which ran from 6 to 8 on Tuesday and Thursday mornings without variation. Gloria was practical and warm, and she had walked many women through exactly this, and her calmness made Carolyn feel like what she was doing was possible. Gloria told her to photograph her documents. Birth certificate, social security card, marriage certificate, the deed to the house which was in both their names, medical records. She told her to open a bank account at a bank Douglas did not use, in her name only, with a mailing address that was not the house. She told her to save what she could, however she could, a little at a time. She told her to record his voice if she safely could. Carolyn began setting aside money from the grocery allowance. Not enough to be noticed. $5 here, $8 there. She opened an account at a credit union across town. She mailed the statements to her sister Denise's address in Lithonia. She told Denise everything on a Saturday in December when Douglas was at a golf tournament he attended twice a month. Denise drove over. She sat at the kitchen table across from her sister and Carolyn talked for 90 minutes without stopping. All of it. From the beginning. Every detail she had never said out loud. Denise sat completely still while Carolyn talked. Her face went through grief and rage and guilt and more rage. When Carolyn finished, Denise reached across the table and took both her hands and said, "I am here. Whatever you need, whenever you need it. I am here and I am not going anywhere." She asked Carolyn why she had not told her sooner. Carolyn said, "Because I was not sure you would believe me. He is so convincing." Denise's jaw tightened. She said, "I believe every single word." The recording happened in January. Douglas had been in a controlled rage for 3 days over something minor, a bill she had forgotten to mention, and on the third evening she had quietly set her phone to record in her cardigan pocket before he came home. She did not know if anything would happen. She just wanted to be prepared. He came home at 7. He found her in the kitchen and stood in the doorway and said, "You have been very sloppy lately. Very careless." "You understand what I mean by careless?" She said she understood. He said, "I want you to understand something very clearly. If you ever embarrass me publicly, if you ever say a single word to anyone about what happens in this house, you will regret it in ways that will take you a long time to recover from. Do you understand me?" She said yes. He walked past her to his study. She stood at the kitchen counter with her heart slamming and her hands very still and the recording running in her pocket. She uploaded that audio to the cloud account that night. She saved it next to the photographs she had been taking of herself in the bathroom mirror. The bruises were mostly healed, but she had documented them when they were fresh. She had a record now. A real, concrete, dated record. She was almost ready. She called Renee in February. It had been over a year since they had truly talked, and the sound of Renee's voice made Carolyn's eyes fill in a way she had not expected. Renee let her cry for a full minute before saying anything. Then she said, "I knew something was wrong. I knew it. I kept calling." Carolyn said, "I know. I am so sorry." Renee said, "Do not apologize to me. Just tell me what you need." She asked Renee to keep a bag. A specific bag with 3 changes of clothes and her important documents and the photograph of her mother from the living room bookshelf and the white card with her son's footprint. She packed the bag on a Thursday morning while Douglas was at the gym, and she drove it to Renee's apartment in Midtown, and she handed it across and Renee held it against her chest like it was something precious. She asked Denise to hold a second bag. Cash and her medications and her laptop and a journal she had started keeping. Her exit had 2 destinations. Denise's house in Lithonia, 40 minutes away. The bags were in place. The account had $430 in it, enough for immediate needs. Gloria at Safe Harbor had connected her with a family attorney named Michelle Okafor who had reviewed the documentation Carolyn had gathered and told her it was substantial. Everything was in place. She just needed the moment. The moment came in March. Cornerstone Baptist held its annual marriage celebration service on the first Sunday of March. It was a tradition at the church, a full service devoted to honoring marriages in the congregation, with testimonies and prayer and a reception afterward. Douglas had attended every year since they joined, and he gave testimony every year. Carolyn had sat beside him every year and smiled. Douglas had told her what to wear. A coral dress she had purchased the previous spring, one he had approved twice before. He held it up Thursday evening and nodded. She pressed it and hung it on the back of the closet door. Friday evening she made a decision she had not planned to make. She drove to the church alone, telling Douglas she needed to drop something off for the women's ministry. She sat in the empty sanctuary for 20 minutes. The afternoon light was coming through the stained glass above the altar and laying colored patterns on the floor and the pews. She sat in the 3rd pew on the left, their usual pew, and she looked at the altar where they had been pronounced husband and wife, and she sat with everything she was carrying. She thought about her son. She thought about the footprint card in the bag at Renee's apartment. She thought about every Sunday she had sat in this pew with a bruise under her sleeve and a smile on her face while people called them couple goals and blessed and what God has joined together. She sat for a long time. Then she went home and she was calm in a way she had not been in 5 years. The particular calm of a woman who has made up her mind completely. Saturday night Douglas checked her phone as he always did. She handed it to him as she always did. He scrolled, found nothing, handed it back. He said, "Wear your hair up tomorrow." She said, "Of course." She did not sleep. She lay in the dark beside him and listened to him breathe, and she thought about the woman she had been at that church fundraiser. The woman who laughed too loudly and sang along to Earth, Wind and Fire in the car and cried at commercials and made the best sweet potato pie in her family. She thought about that woman and she said to her silently, "I am coming back for you. I am almost there. Just hold on one more day." Sunday morning she woke before him. She dressed carefully. Coral dress. Hair up. She stood in the bathroom mirror and looked at her face for a long time. She did not reach for the concealer. There was nothing to cover today. She put on her earrings and her lipstick and she looked at herself and she said quietly to her own reflection, "Today." They arrived at Cornerstone Baptist at 10:45. Douglas held the door. He placed his hand on the small of her back, guiding her down the aisle to their pew. People greeted them warmly. Brother Douglas, looking sharp as always. "Sister Carolyn, that color is beautiful on you." She smiled and said thank you and took her seat. The service was full. Every pew. The choir was extraordinary that morning. They sang a song about restoration, about what God rebuilds from what man destroys, and Carolyn felt the music move through her chest in a way that made her close her eyes. Pastor Emmanuel opened the floor for testimony during the marriage portion of the service. He said, "Who wants to tell the congregation what God has done in your marriage?" Douglas stood up before the echo of the question had finished. He straightened his jacket. He walked to the microphone at the front of the sanctuary with the ease of a man who was entirely comfortable being looked at. He smiled at Pastor Emmanuel. He turned to face the congregation. He said, "First, giving honor to God who is the head of my life." The congregation said amen. He said, "I just want to thank God this morning for blessing me with a wife of grace and patience and faithfulness. A woman who understands what it means to build a life together. Carolyn is my peace. She is my covering. 5 years in, and this woman still makes me want to be a better man every single day." The congregation murmured approval. A woman behind Carolyn whispered, That is so beautiful. Douglas said, marriage is not easy. Anyone who tells you marriage is easy is not being honest. But when you have a woman who is prayerful and submitted and keeps her focus on God, it makes the hard seasons bearable. I am a blessed man. He looked directly at Carolyn when he said the last sentence. She held his gaze. There was a message in his eyes. A reminder. A warning dressed in Sunday clothes in front of 115 witnesses. Something moved through Carolyn's body. She would later struggle to describe it. Not anger, not fear. Something below both of those things. Something elemental. She thought about the cold kitchen floor. She thought about the white card with the footprint. She thought about 4 pages of an unsent email. She thought about her laugh. The full body, hand on chest, head thrown back laugh that had been hers since she was a girl. The one he had taken from her the night he told her she was too loud at a cookout 3 weeks into their marriage. She stood up. The congregation noticed. A few heads turned. A small ripple of curiosity moved through the room. Douglas turned from the microphone. His face did the thing. The stillness behind the eyes. The cold calculation. But they were in a room with 115 people and a pastor and God, and there was nothing he could do right now but hold his expression together. Carolyn walked to the front of the sanctuary. She stood at the microphone. She looked out at the people who had attended her wedding, who had fed her casseroles, who had liked the photographs, who had prayed over their marriage, who had called them couple goals and beautiful and blessed. She opened her mouth and she said, I want to give glory to God this morning for giving me something my husband does not know I have. The courage to tell the truth. The room went very still. She said, I have sat in this pew for 5 years and I have smiled and held his hand and performed a marriage for this congregation and for Instagram and for everyone who wanted to believe in what we looked like from the outside. And I am done performing. She heard someone draw a sharp breath behind her. She said, I have been called stupid and useless and worthless in this marriage. I have been told I am lucky he chose me, that no one else would want me. I have been cut off from my friends and my job and my money and my own voice. I have handed over my phone every single morning so he could go through it before he went to work. She did not look at Douglas. She said, I lost a son in this marriage. A boy I never got to hold. And I know why I lost him. I know exactly why. A woman in the 4th row made a sound. Something broken and recognizing. Carolyn said, my husband is a gifted performer. He is the most convincing man I have ever met. But I need you all to understand something because I am going to walk out of this church today and I need you to know the truth before I go. Performance is not love. Control is not protection. Fear is not respect. And I will not stand beside this man one more Sunday and let anyone in this room believe that what we have is what God intended for his daughters. She stepped back from the microphone. The room was completely silent. Douglas was standing 5 feet away. His hand moved toward her arm. She looked at his hand. She looked up at his face. She said quietly so only he could hear, do not. She turned and walked down the center aisle. Her heels on the old hardwood floor were the only sound in the building. She pushed through the double doors into the March morning. The sunlight was sharp and cold and she stood on the front steps and breathed it in, that cold, clean air, and she felt the sun on her face and she did not move for a moment. She just stood there and breathed. Renee's car was parked across the street. Renee had driven from Midtown and parked there an hour before the service began. Carolyn had texted her the night before. Just 2 words. Tomorrow. Church. Renee had replied, I will be there. The car door opened before Carolyn reached the bottom of the steps. Renee got out and stood on the pavement and opened her arms and Carolyn walked into them and Renee held her and neither of them spoke. Then Renee said, the bag is in the back seat. Carolyn said, I know. Renee said, Denise is at her house waiting. Carolyn said, okay. They got in the car. Renee pulled away from the curb and drove and Carolyn looked out the passenger window at Atlanta moving past in the Sunday morning light. People walking dogs. A man selling fruit from a roadside stand. A little girl in church clothes running ahead of her mother on the sidewalk. Normal life. Just ordinary, beautiful, normal life. Carolyn pressed her fingers against the window glass. She could feel something unclenching in her chest. Something that had been wound so tightly for so long that she had forgotten it was wound at all. A slow, cellular release like a fist opening after years of being closed. She was out. She was really out. She let herself cry then. Not the bathroom floor crying. Not the desperate silent crying of a woman trying not to be heard. Full crying. The kind that comes from relief so profound it has nowhere to go but out. She cried and Renee drove and did not say a single word because she understood that sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone is simply take them somewhere safe and let them feel everything. They drove to Denise's house in Lithonia. Denise was on the front porch before the car stopped. She came down the steps in her housecoat and slippers and she pulled Carolyn out of the car and held her and said, "I got you. You are here. I got you." They went inside. They sat at Denise's kitchen table and drank coffee and did not talk about Douglas for a long time. They talked about Brianna, who Carolyn had texted from the car and who was driving down from Tennessee on Tuesday. They talked about Miss Gloria, Carolyn's mother, who did not yet know the full story and whose reaction Carolyn was not ready to think about today. They talked about small things. The coffee, the morning light coming through Denise's kitchen window, the neighbor's cat sitting on the fence outside. Then Denise said, "Are you okay?" Carolyn thought about it. She said, "I am going to be," and she meant it. For the first time in 5 years, she said something about her own future and meant it completely. What followed was not clean or simple. It was never going to be clean or simple. Douglas's response was exactly what Gloria at Safe Harbor had prepared her for. Came in stages. First the calls she did not answer, dozens of them, until she blocked the number. Then messages through his pastor, carefully worded, performing repentance, suggesting counseling, suggesting that Carolyn had struggled with her mental health since the miscarriage and needed support. Then messages through his mother, who called Denise's house twice and both times Denise answered and both times said with complete finality, "She does not want to speak with you. Please do not call this number again." The congregation fractured the way congregations do when the truth arrives uninvited. Some people reached out to Carolyn. Quiet, private messages. Women who said things like, "I believe you and I have been praying for you and me too." That last one, the "me too," came from a woman Carolyn had sat beside in the Women's Fellowship for 3 years and had never suspected carried anything like what she was carrying. Carolyn held her phone and read that message 4 times. Some people defended Douglas. Said Carolyn should have handled it privately. Said she had humiliated her husband in the Lord's house. Said there were always 2 sides. Said she was clearly not well. She let those words pass through her without stopping. She had expected them. Gloria had told her to expect them. The people who protect the performance are always louder at first than the people who recognize the truth. First, attorney Michelle Okafor filed the divorce papers in April. The documentation Carolyn had gathered was substantial and organized and dated. Michelle said it was among the most thorough documentation she had seen from a client and that it would serve Carolyn well. The house settlement took several months. Douglas fought it with the energy of a man who understood that the house was the last thing he had to use against her. She let him fight. Michelle was patient and precise, and eventually the settlement came back in Carolyn's favor. She did not move back into the house. She did not want the house. She wanted none of it. She found an apartment in Decatur, 2 bedrooms, 3rd floor, with a small balcony that faced east so the morning light came through the sliding door and fell across the kitchen table where she drank her coffee every morning. She painted one wall of the living room a deep, warm terracotta. She hung pictures she had chosen herself. She bought plants and kept them alive and felt an unreasonable pride about the keeping them alive. Brianna drove down the week Carolyn moved in and helped unpack boxes, and they ordered pizza and sat on the living room floor surrounded by the debris of a life being reassembled, and Brianna said, "Mama, this place already feels like you." Carolyn looked around the apartment, at the terracotta wall, at the morning light, at her daughter sitting cross-legged on the floor with a slice of pizza. She said, "It does, doesn't it?" She went back to work in May. Part-time at first, answering an ad for an office coordinator position at a physical therapy practice in Decatur. A different practice, a different part of town, but the work was familiar and she was good at it, and her new colleagues were warm, and one of them, a woman named Bernadette who had been divorced twice and had opinions about everything, became a friend within 3 weeks. Renee came over on weekends. They sat on the little balcony with wine and talked the way they had talked in college, freely and without editing, and Carolyn felt the years of careful measured performance falling away layer by layer, like old paint from something that had always been beautiful underneath. She planted tomatoes on the balcony in June. They grew badly the first season because she did not have the sun angles right. She researched it. She moved the containers. The second season they came in fat and red, and she sliced them and ate them still warm from the sun with salt and felt a satisfaction that was entirely out of proportion to the occasion and entirely appropriate. She lit a candle sometimes on quiet evenings. A small white candle on the kitchen windowsill. She did not explain it to anyone. She knew what it was for. She would sit in the quiet of her apartment with the candle burning and she would speak softly into the room, telling her son about her day, about the tomatoes, about Brianna's new classes, about Miss Gloria who had finally heard the full story and had wept and held her daughter for a long time and then said, "I should have known. I should have asked more." Carolyn had told her mother, "You could not have known. He was very good at this." Her mother had said, "So are you. You are very good at surviving. That is something he could not take." She thought about that often. What he had taken and what he had not been able to take. He had taken her job. She had a new one. He had taken her friends. She had them back. He had taken her voice. She had used it in front of 115 people on a Sunday morning in March. He had taken her laugh. The full body, hand on chest, head thrown back laugh that had been hers since she was a girl. The one he told her was too loud at a cookout 3 weeks into their marriage. The one she had slowly, without realizing it, put away for 5 years. She found it one evening at Bernadette's kitchen table when Bernadette said something genuinely ridiculous and Carolyn heard the sound come out of her, full and unrestrained and completely real, and Bernadette looked at her and said, "That is a great laugh," and Carolyn pressed her hand against her chest and said, "Thank you. I know. I have been looking for it for a long time." He had not been able to take the thing she needed most, the knowledge of who she was before him and the belief that she could find her way back. That knowledge had gone underground for 5 years, but it had never gone out entirely. It had been a small light she kept alive without fully knowing she was keeping it. All those moments of quiet determination, the photographed phone number in the OB's office, the new email account, the unsent draft, the bag at Renee's apartment, the 20 minutes alone in the empty sanctuary on Friday afternoon. All of it fed by that small persistent light that said, "You are not done. You are not finished. You are not who he says you are." She was 46 years old and she was starting over and she was not afraid. On a Thursday evening in October, 7 months after she walked out of Cornerstone Baptist, Carolyn sat on her little east-facing balcony with a cup of tea and her phone and she opened Instagram for the first time since leaving. She had stayed off it deliberately, not ready for whatever performance was still playing out there. But she was ready now. She looked at the profile, the couple photos, the Sunday service captions, the grateful for this man posts, all of it still there, frozen at the moment before she walked out of the church. 643 likes on the last photo. A man and a woman dressed like a magazine, his hand on her waist, her smile so wide and so convincing that a woman in the comments had typed, "This is what I ask God for every single night." She did not delete anything. Let it stay. Let it be a record. She took a new photo. There on the balcony in the evening light, no filter, no husband, no performance. Just her face. Her real face. The shadows under her eyes that told the truth of hard years. The smile that reached all the way up. The smile that was not performed for anyone. She wrote a caption. She wrote, "I am still here." She posted it and set the phone down and picked up her tea and looked out at the evening sky above Decatur. The colors doing something extraordinary at the horizon, orange and deep pink and a blue that went all the way down. The small white candle was burning on the kitchen windowsill behind her. She could see its reflection in the sliding glass door. That small persistent light, still burning, just like her. To anyone watching or listening right now who recognized something of yourself in Carolyn's story, the constant monitoring, the careful calibration, the isolation that arrived dressed as love, the voice you stopped using, the laugh that disappeared, the person you used to be that you can barely remember anymore. What you are living has a name. It is abuse. It does not have to look like a movie to count. It does not have to leave marks you can photograph to be real. If you are afraid in your own home, if you are performing a life that is killing you, if you have listened tonight and thought, that is me, then please know that you are not alone and you are not crazy and you are not too far gone to get out. One call from a parking lot changed Carolyn's life. Yours could change yours. Carolyn's laugh is real now. Her apartment faces east, so the morning light comes in first thing every morning. She talks to her son on quiet evenings, and she believes with everything in her that he can hear her. She is growing tomatoes. She is working again. She calls Renee every Sunday morning without checking the clock first. She is still here. She started this story the way so many women start theirs, with 643 likes on a photo that told a beautiful lie. She ends it on a warm balcony in the evening light, with her real face and her real smile and her real laugh, owing no one a performance. That is what freedom looks like. That is what it looks like when a woman chooses herself. That is what it looks like when